Hello, welcome everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Susan Hirsch, faculty here at ESCAR, and am very, very pleased that we are convening for the dissertation defense of Joseph Obeng-Baah. And I'm happy to have Joseph here, and very happy to have committee member Agnieszka Paczynska, and our third committee member, Dr. Frank Dukes, is joining us from UVA. He's on the computer here. And I'm happy to have everyone else here, and maybe because we are so small, we might just quickly introduce, since we're a small group. Terrence, can I?
Joseph, it's great to see you. I'm Terrence Lyons. I'm on the faculty here and the director of the doctoral program. It's wonderful to see you here today.
Nice to see you, Terrence. Don't start.
Happy to see you.
Yeah, right.
Joseph's senior sister. He comes after me.
Very happy that you're here today. Very happy.
Very happy.
Yeah.
Welcome, Joseph. Very pleased to be able to come back and support you on this important day. Chip you.
Thank you, James.
I don't know the mechanics of others in the room.
Molly, come on, Molly.
Paul Snodgrass.
I'm Ryan. I'm at the front desk.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. And just a little story of introduction. A long time ago, what feels like I was still kind of new to ESCAR and to teaching in the PhD program, I taught a class of students, some of whom are in the room today. I'm very happy to see them today. And I met Joseph Obeng-Baah in that class, and he had finished a lot of his coursework, but was at that time interested in a topic that I was just beginning to be interested in, which was mining and environmental issues. And so we had some great conversations. And since that time, it's been a long road for you, Joseph. A lot of things happened along the way, and I have to say I'm so impressed by your incredible perseverance over the years, and also with the incredible work that you've put into writing this dissertation, which is very, very interesting, and I think achieves so many of the things that you set out to do when you began working on this topic. So we're really happy to have you here today and eager to listen to your presentation. You've prepared a handout that's the table of contents for your dissertation, and that I think is helpful for audience members to see the kind of full scope of it. So our program for today is that in just a minute, I'll turn it over to Joseph, and he'll present for a while about his dissertation, the approach he took, the findings, and its significance. After that, we'll have some questions, starting with committee members, and myself. We'll ask you a few things, talk to you about some of the things that we see in the dissertation, open it up to questions from the audience, and then committee members will retire to another room, have a conversation about the next steps, and we'll come back a little bit after that and talk with Joseph about where we see things, how things stand today. So let me turn it over to you, and we are eager to hear what you found.
Well, thank you so much, Susan. I'm very glad to be here today too. And first of all, let me say thank you so much to Susan, who is my chair, Agnieszka, who is my member of my committee, and Frank, who is present here remotely. Thank you all for the wonderful support, guidance you've given me over the years. Like Susan said, it's been a very long journey, and with your support, I am able to do this today. So, and thank you to Terence. Thank you, James, for the moral support. And my sister has already introduced herself. She had an accident about a month or so ago. She wouldn't let me come alone because she wasn't so sure I can drive all the way from Columbus. So thank you so much for coming. We've come a long way. And Carl, Paul, Molly, I thank all of you. So this morning, I don't know if you've gone into the afternoon, I'm presenting my dissertation, which is pretty much based in a local mining community in Ghana. And I focus particularly on international, multinational mining corporation and their relationship with the local communities in the developing world. So my topic is unearthing the undercurrents of social conflict in a multinational gold mining project community in the eastern region of Ghana. Interestingly, I also come from the eastern region of Ghana. So what was some of the meditations and contemplations behind getting a topic for my dissertation? This idea of mining kept recurring, and I had a personal interest because I come from a place in Ghana where mining is part of community life. A lot of people live subsistence life based on artisanal mining. And I also expressed that whilst I was a journalist in Ghana, I did some reporting on the mining sector. In the 90s, so I want to go a little bit into, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but the political economy of Ghana pre-90s, pretty much from independence in 1957 all the way up to the 90s, most of the institutions, most of the sectors in Ghana were nationalized. They're pretty much centralized. And one of them pretty much was the gold mining sector. Gold has always been very important in the Ghanaian economy. For now, I think it is the highest foreign exchange earner for Ghana, overtaking the cocoa industry. So I wanted to delve a little bit into the dynamics when in the 90s, based on certain major economic policies, such as the Structural Adjustment Program, of which Ghana was a part, how the mining industry actually panned out. Because from the 90s, we had a diversity of state sectors. All the industries now reverted to the private sector. So mining has become a very contentious area in Ghana. Some make the argument that it's good for the economy. Some have also made a lot of criticism with regard to its impact, particularly at the local level. Well, I thought it was a very interesting topic to take a look at. Now, I look at the global landscape or the global topography of mining around the world, mining conflicts around the world, and what has precipitated this mass influx of foreign direct investment in the mining sector. And I look at some of this, if you look, I ask myself, is it a boom or a gloom? Is the mining sector good for the local communities? Is it bad for the local communities? So I try to put up a few pictures. This is, for instance, in Cajamarca in Peru, where we had a lot of farmers pretty much block all the access roads to the Newmont, interestingly, the company I'm studying, to prevent them from going to work. I also have these two pictures. This actually is in the area I'm studying, the community I'm studying, the Ayasu community. This is also a recent demonstration or protest against Newmont again in the Ashanti region. So I did a very quick tour of the global conflict landscape. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But in Peru, Yanacocha mine, the Newmont mine has been a source of conflict over the years. Some of the issues are the environmental impact of mining, such as contamination of local streams, rivers. And this was a very important case when the Newmont mine had wanted to expand its project onto the Hirsch mountain, which is a source of water for a lot of the communities around. There was mass protest led by the regional president, which eventually led to declaring the area the Hirsch mountain nature conservation zone. Eventually, Newmont had to pull out of that. It's about $5 billion project, and it had to pull out because of protests. We also have Papua New Guinea, which has been the mainstay of conflict over the years, starting from the Bougainville conflict in 1972. Indonesia, the Sumbawa region, where once again Newmont, was this protest against Newmont during their exploration, in which about 4 people were injured, shot. We have the Buyat Bay region, where there was this tailing pollution of their rivers. That issue basically resulted in, I think, the $30 million civil suit by the government. We also have Guatemala, which has been a mainstay of conflict. South Africa, recently the Marikana mining area. And then Ghana, where I focus on. We've had several conflicts across the mining belt in Ghana, such as the mine field, the area of study, and then we have other places like Pristia, Obuasi, and other areas across the country. Now, what are some of the structural, and I wanted to take a look at some of, because I am focusing on multinational mining corporations, and they started going into the developing world from the 90s, when we had mass influx of FDI, foreign direct investment, following up basically on Bretton Woods institutions' recommendations for these economies. So what are some of the underlying structural dynamics of this conflict in these local communities? So I said earlier, in the 90s, we had this wave of denationalization of economies. Before then, they were nationalized simply because there was perceived sense of exploitation from the colonial era. Now, in the 90s, they had to pretty much give up, largely because of mismanagement. And most importantly, too, because of what I will talk about later, this idea of being competitive in terms of attracting capital inflow through FDI. And I also will look at the concept of race to the bottom, which has been a major issue around discourses of mining and development. Some suggest that it is a race to the bottom in the sense of its environmental impact and economic impact, direct socio, cultural, and economic impact at the local level of impact. Some have made the argument that the race to the bottom thesis basically suggesting that in the process of wanting to be competitive, in the process of wanting to be the nice guy with a nice business environment, a lot of these companies relax their regulatory standards. They relax their tax regimes in order to attract this investment. And the race to the bottom also talks about this notion of coercive arbitrage, where companies pretty much move offshore to areas such as this developing world where the conditions, the regulatory environment, the taxes are lower, because they don't want to work in an environment where they will have to, their production costs will go up because of strict regulatory standards. Then I also look at the structure. So all of these things are structural issues. For instance, the host government coming up with these laws that enable these mining companies to pretty much sometimes work in environments with very little oversight, if you will, very little regulation. Now, government, I try to look at the relationship dynamics between the company and government on the one hand, and then the community on the other, and explore the idea of power asymmetry. You realize that in most of these communities, you have a lot of power asymmetry between the local community in terms of their negotiating powers when it comes to issues like compensation, other environmental issues, socioeconomic issues. You also have the research basically shows that there have been a lot of instances when the government, going back again to this idea of being competitive and being welcoming, have basically sided on the side of the company when it comes to community company issues. Now, one of the major structural issues that I also realized was in terms of the government, if you will, abdication of its responsibility, that basically heightens the power dynamics between communities and the local and the company, is the idea that these companies often wield a lot of economic power, sometimes political power, and therefore they are able to pretty much do whatever they want because of the role they eventually come to play as de facto providers of employment and infrastructure and all this kind of stuff. Okay, so having delved into some of these structural underpinnings of the general global conflict topography, I wanted to also explore these concepts, the concept of animism and the concept of anthropocentrism, and see how that plays in the relationship between mining companies, foreign mining companies, and local communities, indigenous communities, if you will. So the literature basically shows that the mining industry, particularly foreign direct investment mining industry, has this mindset. They basically bring this anthropocentric mindset to how they see land, how they see the social and environmental cost. Whereas in the local communities, in indigenous communities, they do their analysis of their relationship with the mining communities through an animistic and a holistic perspective in terms of their loss. So, for instance, the anthropocentric mining view sees things like land in extrinsic instrumentalist way, if you will. They see land pretty much, they see a discrete, separate world, a dichotomy between the natural world and the social world. There is no interconnectivity whatsoever, or intersubjectivity. They see land pretty much through its utilitarian instrumentalist value. Land is there to serve the interests of man. And therefore, they bring a scientific economistic approach to the analysis of their social relations. When you come to the local communities, they see a holistic interconnectedness between nature and man. And in that sense, land environment they interpret this through a dual register of both the intrinsic value and the extrinsic value. In other words, the land or the environment provides human beings or them with their daily needs, their daily affordances. But in addition, they also see it in spiritual terms, in cosmological terms. So I was trying to see what has been the focus of contemporary research when it comes to mining conflicts. And I came across the literature, there's a lot of work done on the tangible issues, such as emphasis on access to land. Hilson has done a lot of work in Ghana for that, and sometimes Hilson and Yakovleva, Kapelos, they've all done a lot of work on that, Oredu and so many others. Community resistance, issues of human rights, environmental impact, and to some extent, community-company relationship. There's been a lot of work done in all these areas. Now, what I asked myself was, oftentimes we see conflict in the mining sector through the physical manifestations of the headline news, the violence and just as I showed over there, the kidnappings and all those kind of stuff. But I started thinking around the idea that oftentimes when you go to these mining communities, the conflict is not always seen in the headlines. So, and they don't perpetually fight, they don't perpetually go on demonstrations, but the conflict persists. So what are some of the other dynamics of this kind of stuff? So beyond the protests and the media frenzy and co, what about the invisible drivers of the conflict? Because of that, I agree and pretty much went along an epistemological line along the lines of Mogadam et al., who have done a lot of work on positioning, those kind of stuff. The idea being that the emphasis on the talking and writing of conflict. The emphasis that the flow of talking and writing within which the hostile action of the conflict is usually set. That was where my emphasis was. Bearing in mind that conflicts are often waged through discursive processes, the talking. It reminds me, and I started doing some reflection. A lot of the fights, even interpersonal fights we have, are often not the blows. It is the talk around those things, the gossip around, he said this, she said this, that kind of stuff. So I wanted to explore that line of empirical inquiry. So I decided to focus on discourse, the role of discursive practices in conflict. And once again, I realized that the literature, there's been a lot of work done generally on discourse in conflict, but the emphasis is not what I wanted to add to the literature. The emphasis was much more on using discourses as resources, strategic resources, if you will, to advance their interests, to fight for their rights when it comes to mining, the impact of mine. So, for instance, discourse has been strategically used as a resource to articulate power imbalances relating to things like values and rights and distribution of mineral resources, social and environmental impact, and the lack of representation, which is a major issue. It's also been used by pro-mining discourses as a strategic resource to pretty much put the locus on the positive transformation impact of mining and away from the negative impact of mining. So these courses have been used both ways. Now, so I wanted to look at emerging research in the centrality of discourse itself. I wasn't interested in, even in this instance where discourse is used as a strategic resource. I wanted to see the role or explore the role of discourse itself within mining context. So in my research, I came across the work of Ozen and Ozen, which was a project done in two comparative projects done in research done in two communities in Turkey in gold mining. And I found something that was very interesting along the line of my thinking, that the emergence of struggle is mainly due to the construction of rival discourses. The emergence was not so much on the tangible issues, it was on the construction, the discourses within the conflict itself. So I said, okay, then I am going to focus on the role of discourse in terms of its centrality in conflict itself, and I focus on looking at how discursive positioning of self and other, and of each other in conflict, drives the conflict, shapes it, and then drives it. So coming down to Ghana, obviously, as I said earlier, there is a lot of, we have a lot of conflict over the years in Ghana. And as I dig through the literature, did some Nexus, and went into the database and other things, I hardly came across any work that had been done specifically on discourse and the role of discourse in conflict in Ghana. And it's important, I say, to focus on this because I've made the argument, and the literature shows that oftentimes these parties, the communities and the mining companies, are of a necessity for us to live alongside for several years because the mining concessions licenses usually last between 30 and 40 years. The area I studied, pretty much the new Multinational, pretty much is going to go into the active exploration. Extraction will take about 20 years. There are plans that they will even do underground mining and all this kind of stuff. So it's going to be there for a while. So and obviously you're not going to have protests every single day in the course of those 30 to 40 years. And yet the conflict persists. So what are some of the dynamics in terms of the discursive practices? So I try to look at the overarching question of why the relationship between mining company, and in my case, just one mining company, and the communities affected by its activities continues to be marred by conflict long after the happy days are over. We have the money, we've got the compensation, and yet they do not have a good relationship. And I did that by trying to answer 3 specific questions in terms of how different the discursive and interpretive practices, in terms of how the community and mine officials' discursive positioning and subjective interpretation of each other's actions contribute to the conflict. I also wanted to find out how different these discursive and interpretive practices are in the Ayaso community and in the Hriakwai community, the 2 communities I studied. And I also wanted to find out the role of these interpretive and discursive practices in the context of conflict resolution. So I want to quickly clarify the scope of my conflict. Now in Ghana, it's interesting, we have a dual economy in the mining sector. We have the artisanal mining sector, we normally call them Ganamse. And then we have the traditional mining sector, generally dominated by multinational mining corporations. Interestingly, you hardly hear of conflict in the artisanal mining area, even though they cause the most environmental impact. As a matter of fact, last year, if you know, we now have a new president in Ghana, and he came into power, I think, January of last year, and it's become a national priority to rid the country of this unlicensed artisanal, including a lot of Chinese people who are in the country polluting water. It's become almost like the Holy Grail. As a matter of fact, one soldier was killed, a soldier deployed. He was a major, who basically was killed by some of these local communities because he had come there to disturb them. That is not, that area of mining, the artisanal mining, generally you don't hear of them when it comes to conflict. You do hear a lot of conflict in settings where we have multinational corporations. So my focus was on multinational corporations. In other words, I'm not interested in the artisanal mining area and conflict. They do sometimes have conflict, artisanal miners with the large scale miners in terms of access to land, where normally we have non-commercial quantities of deposit, but these bigger companies won't give the artisanal miners, the ordinary guys, the access to. That's also been a lot of an area of conflict that Hilson and Co. have actually studied. My interest was in the communities and the large mining corporations. And I did a comparative approach. I did a case study with embedded unit approach. I wanted to do a comparative studies of 2 affected communities. One was relocated, the other was not. They are pretty much in the same area. The 2 villages used to be about, I think, 4 miles apart, and they relocated them to around the Hriakwai area. So I wanted to look at the dynamics, the discursive dynamics in terms of a community that has been completely removed. In other words, they have been completely estranged from the land they had geographically and from the village they had known for all these years. So in my analysis, I tried to do a combined analytical analysis using the focus. My principal framework was positioning analysis, and I complemented that with symbolic interactionism. Not so much because there was something I think I was trying to look for in terms of the symbolic meaning, interpretation that both the mind and the communities, but particularly the communities, give to the actions of each other. So positioning theory, I use the positioning triangle. It's based on the assumption that we have three clusters. We have a storyline, and we have positions that are emerging out of that storyline, and most importantly, the illocutionary force, the social force of what is being said within a particular strip of episode. So we have an unfolding storyline, we have the positions, and then we have the social meaning. And then symbolic action, Blomer and co., I basically focus on the Chicago school of symbolic interactionism in the tradition of Blomer. The idea that it's based pretty much also on three premises. The idea that the assumption that human beings react to things based on what things mean to them. And I think that's true. Even gestures will have certain local contexts. So something that you might do that might be meaningful in one context may not necessarily be meaningful in the other context. And then we have the argument that the meanings ascribed to things are derived from the social interactions. In other words, the past history of my interaction with you leads me to make this interpretive meaning about what you are doing or what you have done or what you have said. And that these meanings are handled in and modified through an interpretative process used by the person in dealing with the things he encounters. So these are the two frameworks I try to bring to the analysis of the conflict. So we go to the discussions. The first finding I found was the feeling of unfulfilled expectations. So here you have community discourses of broken promises. And then there is this going back resort to historical past. We have these conversations or discourse or narrations of dissipating moral and social values in the community as a result of Newman's presence there. And the mind also, interestingly, also engages in discourses of victimhood. Now, fairly quickly, when it comes to broken promises, there's this idea when they came, and I hear stories like these guys will come, these mining officials will come to our community sometimes 2, 3, 4 times a day. When interested, they will tell you, sometimes they even bring us takeaway. It's like the drive-through things, right? They give us nice fried rice and all this kind of stuff. When they see us on the road, they pick us up. To the extent, that was very interesting. So they will pick us up on the road to the extent that the drivers who basically work along those routes started complaining that they were no longer getting jobs because the mine officials were just picking them up as they sit down along the line. So there was promise of plenty of jobs according to the community. We will give you alternative livelihood in addition to the jobs. And they make the argument that it is based on these promises that they decided to give away their land. And having the feeling that those promises were just that, promises, the community results in hostile, and all of this I emphasize on the hostile discourses. In their discourses, they go back to the historical past. Like, these guys are here, just like their grandfathers did in the past. They are here to come and take our land. So a resort to colonial evaluations of the mind's present actions, sometimes going deep into slavery. Right? So there is that discourse, and we said it, we knew it. These guys were just coming to do the same thing again. And then there's one interesting thing I found about agreements and promises. The local community make their dissatisfaction and disappointment, the sense of betrayal through promises, which they saw pretty much as a friendly, a gentleman promise. We don't have to engage in any paperwork. We believe them based on what they are doing, and therefore we know all of these promises are going to come to us. The mind also says no. Agreement, we fulfilled our agreements in the sense that we delivered all those things that were signed on paper. This was a major source of hostility between all of them, and a lot of the discourses were pretty much constructed through this framework. Then we also have the mind, the communities basically, now that the promises have been broken, now that we know that you guys are only here to do what you guys have been doing for ages, you are, in addition, also now, those are the social impact, you are in addition destroying our community. Now, because you have disempowered us economically, now we are becoming increasingly reliant on others. We have become dependent in such a way that our kids, we are now experiencing a lot of teenage pregnancies. We are experiencing a lot of divorces. One guy told me, I went to the bush to work, I came back, and my wife has left one child behind and taken the two along with her because she couldn't enjoy it anymore. I can't deal with this poverty forever and ever. And they were perfectly fine before the mining economy arrived. So these are some of the hostile discourses. Now, go back to this idea of economistic, rational, scientific evaluation of, not by the mind, of its relationship with the local communities. They normally see their relationship pretty much in the context of corporate social responsibility. What we are doing in terms of things like building schools or giving them infrastructure, they see their good relationship in that light. PR, if you will. So you hear discourses of we are giving them food support, we are giving them agricultural support, and one official says something that's been very interesting. He basically roots this assertion of responsibility, of going beyond what is expected of them in recognition of awards. That because we've been getting this award, it translates directly into the fact that we are doing something good in the community. Now, so I look at these two ontological worldview of nature, as I said earlier. How does the mind, for instance, see land? And how do the local communities, members of the local community also see land? So for instance, you had this one, this is very interesting. One community member basically said, for the many years I spent growing up in the village, so going back to a nostalgic reliving of the place they have lost. For the many years I spent growing up in the village, I never saw the river dwindle once. They did what they wanted. Interestingly, he says, my grandfather will make a ritual offering to that river. It speaks to the intrinsic value of nature to them. Now, so these are the discourses of nostalgia that speaks to the mind's impact on their life when it comes to not only environmental, but in spiritual and cultural terms. Now, when it comes to the mining official or the mine, they emphasize, so when we are talking about loss of our streams, they are also emphasizing on the fact that substantial money was invested in giving them modern day source of water, discounting this component, the ritual part, the cultural part of it. So everything is seen through the lens of economics or science. So in this case, now when we come to just the ordinary instrumentalist value of the environment, for instance, when it comes to water, whereas the mind is making the argument that we have given them good, sophisticated modern water instead of the flowing water in the river, they also accuse the mind of actually trying to endanger their lives, because the mind intentionally, in their discourses, hostile discourses, the mind intentionally use inferior feedings to give them the water. And that, I always tell them, you said you should come here to die, and that's exactly what is happening. That, when you say it's like when they come, I will tell them this. You see the rustic condition of the pipe? That's exactly the state of our stomachs. So, from even its instrumentalist value, they are making the argument that the man is positioned as insensitive, giving them something that is not up to standard, in addition to the animistic interpretation of their laws. There's one thing that was interesting when I went through when I was doing the analysis there, a relocation event of a shrine that took place in the Hwiakwai community. Now, this is typically how a shrine looks like. And this actually is from Kleko in the Volta region of Ghana. This is Talensi in the Tongo area of the northern part of Ghana. And this is a typical picture of a fetish priestess or fetish priest in Ghana. It means a lot to them when it comes to spirituality, when it comes to... now, these are usually shrines that are outdoors, oftentimes in the surroundings of the community and sometimes in the bush. In the case of the Hwiakwai community, it was actually in the forest. And they had to relocate, move, because it was in their concession, so they had to move it from the concession to a place so the mine could work. Now, whereas the community emphasized the importance of this sacred event, the mind seems to approach the whole thing as a normal business transaction with a sense of detachment, disinterest, that kind of stuff. And I found that very interesting. So, and in his narration, in the discourses of the one senior mine official, he was basically constructing this event as though the shrine is something in the past. It's no longer of importance to them, but we just have to move it out of the way so we can do our work. So it says, in the olden days. In the same storyline, another official also says, now, see, they used to worship there in the olden days. Now, another official is saying, now the chiefs and elders go there and worship. Now, Nananum go there to pray, pacify, and do all the necessary customary rituals to the gods. So what I realized was it was much more of something, the part of doing business. We just have to get this out of the way. They did not take the opportunity to actually do a cross-cultural learning that perhaps could help them along the way in terms of how they deal with some of these animistic challenges. Now, one interesting thing too I found was that they emphasize the economic side, the investment. One mine official said, we have a nice place for the shrine and we even put a nice fence around it. And I said, the last time I checked, if you go back, you realize that, I don't know if I think I'm way off there. The pictures I show, there is no fence around it. It's not because they cannot afford a fence, it's because it's a secret, spiritual, cultural thing. And that's how they are still interpreting it. Okay. So, I hope I didn't skip my... all right, okay. So, it says they are only in for the money. One senior man official was expressing why the guys were just interested in getting the money. It wasn't too much about the relocation ritual, it's about the money they will get out of the compensation. So, they construct discourses that infantilize these chiefs and elders to whom these things means a whole lot in terms of their cultural identity. So, attachment. And I think I want to go through this quick because I think my time is way gone, right? It's okay. I think I've actually dealt with this. So. In the Hwiakwai community, the two communities, they construct discourses of deep regret for what the man has done for them. We gave you this because of what your promise is. We never intended to give away our land. He says, for instance, oh my God. And I remember very well when this woman was making her narration. A lot of his aspirations, oh my God. This land was never passed on to us to be sold. It talks about this cultural identity, that linkage between past ancestors. Now, the mind feels that it's just an open space. I mean, no one lived there, but because people realize, and I talk about in the dissertation, I talk about this Abuoso incident, where they accused them, said this is our place of worship, and they said, no one lived there. You guys are only going up there to put structures to extract money from. So they always see it through the language of economics. Okay, so hostile discourses, and I'm going to run through this very quick. Hostile discourses, particularly the EPA. The EPA is supposed to be the neutral regulator and make sure that these mining operations across the country are doing the right thing in terms of the social and environmental impact. Interestingly, when they come over there, they come to this community, at least in the Hwiakwa community, they come with the officials of the mine to convey forums that are intended as a confidential forum for the community to express their problem, the problems they have with the mine. One chief said, we are all human beings, we'll live here with them all the time. When you have them right in front of us, what do you think we can tell you actually what we think about them? That kind of stuff. So this was overt display of power that I thought was very interesting. So the standard of living survey, I think I talk about that in several areas where they didn't give them, it comes to the issue of free, prior, informed consent, that they survey them to figure out who would need help down the line. They didn't tell them the focus, the intention of that study. A lot of people, feeling that if we tell them we're making so much money, we might get a lot of compensation. They indeed did so, and the mine eventually provided the community food based on this. And it's been a long struggle between the community and the mine, the argument being that what you told us is what we are reinforcing, and the guys are saying, they make a very interesting argument. The fact that you relocated, particularly so you relocated all of us, means, makes this whole idea about economic standard of living moot, because the farms on which we live to make this living are now gone. So you can no longer tell us that we so have the means to take care of ourselves. So so it's a very interesting case. I think it doesn't show well. Normally in a typical Ghanaian village, in the evening or day, you see a lot of the hustle and bustle. If you go to Yaso, it's almost eerie, it's quiet. It's just very interesting because I knew the old Yaso, and I know this relocation is a beautiful place. But there is that sense of hopelessness. You see people pretty much ensconced in their homes, and they tell you it's not because we don't have anything. If you were to hear the cries coming out of the houses, you'll be surprised how much you can hear. We are all hungry. We don't have anything to do, so we are in the house. It was very, very interesting because I have a personal familiarity with the place over the past several years. I know the old Yayasu, which is a typical village, but a busy one. We're happy with their life. And the new one, which is way better than Hwiakwa in terms of the architecture, but there's still that feeling of alienation. Okay, so from dignified, subsistent to suspect. Now the other community members, the Hwiakwa community members actually feel they are accusing the Yayasu community members of stealing their stuff from their farms. So he said, we used to have plenty. We used to sell food stuff to Abrim, to other people. Now, because you brought us here, we no longer have anything, and now we are being blamed as thieves in our neighborhood, which means, and it's another line of intra-community conflict that the mine has orchestrated. So I look at the symbolic interpretation. Now, I think I said this in the past. The water that has been provided them, obviously, from a public health perspective, better than the flowing river and the streams, are now interpreted as an attempt to pretty much endanger their health because they because of the idea that they retrofitted the whole thing with inferior. So it's not even about the retrofitting. It's the idea that we lost one. They said that our rivers were as white as tap. Now you have given, so this water that is provided them is subjectively interpreted as something negative. Now the vanity, the man also, when they got the compensation, most of them bought plenty of cars, and I hear one said one person could stand on his 2 feet and buy 5 cars at a stretch. Somebody said, if you go to the drinking bars, one could just buy Guinness, bottles of Guinness he could not consume. You know, so the mind is saying, yeah, you can't blame us that we are unable to, we don't have any obligation to you beyond what we have done, because you engage in vanity of vanities. You spend your money on unnecessary things. If you had saved the money, you could have, perhaps you wouldn't be complaining to us. So this also generated this. So the interpretation, what was supposed to, they built a lot of houses around. The local community feels that obviously houses, even in America, is a source of pride to families. In that village, these guys are saying, yeah, you build these houses because you made your own choice to build your own house. So if you are complaining about poverty, you can't really blame us. And one interesting thing was the cemetery. One lady said, yeah, they had already told us they wanted to kill us. They relocated them, built a new township, and therefore they will have to build a cemetery, a nice one, and they are symbolically interpreting that based on the mind's action, as they say, as an attempt to get rid of them so they will no longer have to bear the responsibility, the complaints they hear from the local. Okay, so very quickly, I look at some important turns where I think the company missed. Where there were real opportunities for learning that could have changed the trajectory of, or that could help, better the relationship they have. And I make the case of these opposing worldviews between animism and anthropocentrism. They always look at their relationship from the perspective of economics. The unmanaged expectations, that deep sense of betrayal. At a point, these guys were going there all the time, having frequent interaction. At a point, they started withdrawing those gestures, and that was when things started. And they could have, and with that, started these hostile discourses about the mind's actual intentions and all this kind of stuff. So, and we have breakdown in communication and engagement, which resulted in rumors. A lot of the community were engaged in hostile discourses that were based on rumors and hearsay. And I think it was interesting. I was going through, Susan, your work with Frank, and talk about autistic hostility, where communication breaks down and we talk past each other and we root our discursive practices in rumors and threats. So and then once again, I talk about the problematic role of EPA. And then the resort to the historical past. I think I should be done after taking about double of the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a marathon. Thank you so much for a detailed and organized presentation. Thanks, Terrence. As is often our custom, we will, if you agree, Frank, turn to you first to ask some questions. Is that okay?
Sure.
Great.
Thank you very much, first, Joseph. It's so fascinating, and I'm thinking, I'm thinking of other outside or inside water development. I'm thinking, occupying armies. I'm thinking there's so many lessons here, not just around the mining element of that. So you closed your last slide, with the important conversational turns. You talked about the lost opportunity for cross-cultural learning. I'm curious what you would say could be done now. And you can answer this, you don't have to answer from all the positions, right? But if you were a community leader, or if you were a mining leader, or a government official with regulatory responsibility, I'm wondering what would you do at this point? So you can point to the lost opportunities, but what would you do at this point? And this is obviously speculative, but based on the research you've done and the people that you've talked to. And you could just pick one of those roles.
Okay, thank you very much, Frank. Yes. So, for instance, I think I was interested in that cross-cultural learning that never was. It was important in the sense that a lot of the conversations have been around the sense of loss, of which, obviously, we have this cultural event regarding the shrine. I would encourage, let's assume I am leading a group like that, to take this seriously. As a matter of fact, because there are a lot to benefit, to gain from these things. The idea that the source of a lot of these hostile discourses are rooted in these animistic beliefs means you take it seriously. I think Crawley have done some work on that in Australia, and they mention, they refer to what they call enduring engagement, which is pretty much true. Over here, there was this, they approached the whole thing with as a business transaction, actually even accusing the elders that this is not anything important. You are actually in this for something. Now, if you truly engage in enduring engagement, then it is an opportunity to actually learn from them, from the cultural perspective, sit down with them, make sure you respect the cultural particularities, and learn from them. Now, when it comes to communication, if I were to, and probably I'll quickly address the EPA too. When it comes to the dearth of communication, which orchestrated these rumors and other things, it was, based on my hearing from the community, something that was intentionally done once they got their social license. I mean, once they got their permitting, they pretty much felt that the social license to operate also ended right there. So they pretty much withdrew their community engagement. I think going through the literature, engagement through participatory approach is very important. And this was pretty much, to a very large extent, was absent. When I went there, there's this, they will tell you there's something they call manage closely. Once again, from a PR perspective, they have certain people, particularly the chiefs, that they do engage. They say they have them in their database, and they said, one senior man official said, we always want to keep them satisfied. Well, the conflict is not coming from those chiefs. Oftentimes it is at the grassroots, the ordinary people that you do not want to engage. So through participatory engagement, I would say, in this sense, will be meeting. They have that opportunity. They have what we call a Durbar, with an opportunity to meet with these communities, the ordinary members of the communities, to find out their problems and genuinely engage them in a sense that makes them feel that you're actually listening to them. One person said, I thought it's straightforward that if you promise me a pen that you bring it next week, when you come next week, you bring me that pen. But in their case, they don't only not bring the pen, they move on to exercise book. So I will think that engagement means actually engagement. And from this point, the mistake they made was to withdraw that initial engagement. If they had continued that, obviously the problems will come, but that is part of the social license to operate. For me, I think that will be the cost of doing business. Yes, Frank.
Could I ask a follow-up?
Yes, sir.
Is that okay?
Sure,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
So I think there obviously there's the asymmetry, and you talked about that right from the front in the power that they have. So,
right.
If as a conflict professional, a conflict intervener, thinking from that sort of framework, I'm wondering, there's a tension between helping develop processes that would allow for that thorough exploration of those cultural differences, of the various uses of discourse, etc. Or you come from a perspective of what's needed is power, and you can't actually have an effective conversation until you have one group that has more symmetrical, different forms of power. So I'm curious your reflections on that. I see you nodding, so you thought about this.
Yes, I did. I have. Yes, so for instance, I talk about that. obvious power asymmetry between the community and the EPA. Interestingly, it's like the EPA has decided to do the mine's job. And somebody said, you know what, when they come, they actually even fund where they sleep. They pay for their hotel bills and those kind of stuff. So what do you expect? I think those are basically structural issues. I'm not necessarily sure that we can deal with that at the local level, because when it comes to this power dynamics, these ordinary people, and I saw one interesting thing too, the chiefs. These mines, you know, they have this nice relationship with the leaders, the main leaders, right? And those underneath these leaders basically argue or criticize that they are not helping them, right? So if we can empower, resource, say the EPA, to a point where they do not have to rely on these mining entities, then I believe that will bring a certain level of objectivity in terms of what they are actually mandated by the Constitution to do. As it is, we have that power asymmetry pretty much rooted in the economic dynamics. I think that's what I basically heard. So I'm not sure that without addressing these structural issues in terms of economics and power, that we are necessarily going to make a whole lot of difference when it comes to, for instance, the role of the EPA in the village.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Frank.
Frank, anything else? Do you want to ask a different question? The floor is yours.
No, I'll cede my time to Agnieszka and you. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Joseph. This was such a fascinating project. And as you see, I've been scribbling all sorts of notes because I think it just raises so many interesting and important questions about this process. And some of the things I'm going to mention right now is really following up on some of the points that Frank was making, because I think it's really sort of the crux of the problem in many ways is this power imbalance, right? That makes it difficult for these consultations and negotiations and communications to unfold. And I think you do a great job showing the differences in how the mining officials and the communities think about these issues, how they understand what actually is being contested, and how that varied gulf between the interpretations of what is happening drives the conflict further. But I think it also raises really important questions about sort of, you know, what is the meaning of free prior informed consent, right? Which is so central to sort of the international norms governing not just the mining sector, but foreign direct investment processes, right? Concessionary agreements between governments, right, and companies, whether it's in mining sector or agricultural, agribusiness, right? I'm thinking of some of the big palm oil plantations that have sprung up across the globe, really, and that there is this notion that as part of good practices, you need to have free prior informed consent from the communities. And to what extent is that actually nonsensical given these power imbalances and what to do about that, right? Because it's not just a problem in Ghana, but it's a problem across the globe. Just in terms of some other ideas that you may have that come out of this research. The thing that I found, and as you were talking, it occurred to me that it's there's a certain irony in this, and perhaps it's again a reflection of where did I write this down? Of who was really pushing for corporate social responsibility, right? Because in many ways, the very way that corporate responsibility is framed, from, if I understand your argument correctly, is one of the things that's driving this conflict, right? Because the company has a sense, I'm fulfilling my obligations under social corporate responsibility, right? And yet, and perhaps it's yet again a reflection of these power imbalances, because who was pushing for, this social corporate responsibility? A lot of it was coming out of activists, but in the global north, with activists from global south really being absent to a large extent from these conversations. So, just a couple big thoughts that I'm trying to link with this power imbalance business, but so I don't know if you can understand.
Okay, so obviously you have the power dynamics very strong throughout the conflict. Interestingly, you talk about corporate social responsibility, and it's very fascinating, because if you go to the Achim area, I mean, I lived there for many, many, many years, in the 90s and the late 80s. If you go there now, the place has completely changed. I went to, for instance, to the hospital, and I was fascinated. The hospital used to be a very small place. Now, it used to be a clinic. Now, it's a district hospital. And a lot of the facilities, in terms of the building, in terms of the equipment, have actually been provided by the company. They have actually even provided other hospitals, as I heard from them, in places like in Koko and other places. So yes, in that sense, they do have a lot of power when it comes to the power dynamics. So yeah, they actually feel that they have overdone what is required of them. And that also drives these hostile discourses coming from the mind, that the mind is, the community members are actually unreasonable. I mean, we've done all these things for you, and yet you accuse us based on some flimsy, some promise. They call it fabricated promises. You actually fabricated those kind of promises. But once again, yes. So I come back to that power dynamics. I'm not sure how we can actually address those power dynamics, because it's a broader structural issue. It's because most often a lot of these companies in the global south tend to, I say, they are the de facto providers of so many things. And oftentimes it's either the government, the host government's unwillingness to provide those things, or their inability to provide all these things. So when the research shows, when these companies have to be in the shoes of doing the government's job, then obviously that can drive a whole lot of things. There was this interesting thing about the EPA and the building of cracks. That's very interesting. This, because of the vibration, and I think I was there, I felt it once. Oh, yeah. Normally around the evening when they are blasting, you can actually feel the vibration. And it's brought about an emergence of cracks in the buildings, because these are very old buildings in the village of Huakwai. Now, obviously the EPA is not ready to say that these things are the result of the blasting, obviously because of the power dynamics, right? So that's also a person. Let me quickly come to, when you talk about FPIC, it's very interesting. Obviously, Susan, I think, asked me this question at a point. The village, the members of the community have no idea what FPIC is. But as a framework, it guides a lot of their relationship. A lot of the things that the community accuses the miner of, such as the food program, that was pretty much rooted in this scientific investigation into who has and who has not. At the core of that issue is the issue of FPIC, because they consistently create discourses, hostile and accusative, whatever it is, that they were not properly informed. So you cannot, they give justificatory excuses. You didn't inform us properly, so you can't blame us for saying things that we really didn't mean. It is a major problem, the problem of FPIC, as you said, across the world, actually. You know, when it comes to I think the UN Convention on People's Human Rights, Declaration on Human Rights, I think a couple of them those are the overarching global instruments that guides the idea of human rights and indigenous rights, under which we have FPIC issues. Several regional, I think I talk about regional blocks. The most robust, actually, interestingly, is the ECOWAS guiding principles on harmonization in the mining sector, which I think came out in 2009. The problem with this instrument, and obviously we have the African Charter 2 on peoples and human rights, right? And you actually have the court, African court on peoples and human rights. The problem is they do not have teeth. The court does, but the charter, for instance, the African charter, the provisions therein, including the FPIC, are only enforceable to the extent that the AU basically vote in favor of it when these decisions come along. There were several decisions, issues, I think complaints from, Ogoni people in Nigeria, some other indigenous community in Ethiopia, and these issues are still pending because power is pretty much left to the states when it comes to implementation of these things. In Ghana, you have the 1992 Constitution, basically is not loud in terms of issues of FPIC, but it provides those protection under the EPA. The only problem is that Ghana was one of the first, I think along with Senegal, that pretty much recognized the ECOWAS principle, they call it. The only problem is that they've gazetted it, but it's not being incorporated into law. That's what the research shows. So we talk about these things, but there's no binding, regulatory binding or legal binding instrument to bind these companies, if you will. In other words, it is much more of a voluntary thing because it's good for business, it's good for the reputation of these companies, these organizations, but we don't have any legal instrument that binds them from doing, let's say, what is right by the communities. So once again, I think these are structural issues. Either the company on its own volition, and there's the literature that some actually have. I think I did some work on Rio Tinto's chief executive. I think is very serious on that, knowing that some of these issues drive the hostilities in the communities. But it's pretty much evolution, I think. I don't know am I done with the question?
Go ahead, because I feel like I asked like 3 questions.
Okay, let me hear the other one. Yes.
Well, I'm not sure I'm going to do
Fell
anything different.
What was the other one?
I have.
Because I have lots of, I can talk about this stuff for the next few days.
Yeah, I mean, it's such rich food for thought, and for us to think about other examples as well. So you're sure you're okay, Ben? All right, so I'll probably do the same thing in terms of like a conglomeration of comments and questions. And the one really is, it really does, allow us to kind of take some of the things that you found and compare and contrast, as Frank said, with other similar kinds of conflict. From my own view, I would think about the particular place in which I looked at issues, Frank and I looked at issues of mining. And,
Appalachia.
Yeah, in Appalachia. And I even went back to a couple of articles that I had found really useful at the time when we were working on the book, talking about a sort of slightly different dichotomous set of discourses of like the pristine land that was being violated, as kind of one discursive frame, as compared with the rational exploitation of land as another frame. And then to think about the contrast between, and not everybody in Appalachia would use those too, but to think about pristine in comparison to space that has this kind of deep cultural meaning. Maybe nobody's living there, but it is nature, but it is culture and it is history. And so it's nice to have examples that you can really see how the discourses end up looking a bit different, but still ending up into conflict because they contrast with, a global overarching discourse of scientific kind of rationalism or economistic thinking. And we might think about what that second label is and whether it's capitalism. I mean, it's, this is an extremely powerful overtaking frame that we're all living in at this moment. But I enjoyed thinking about the cultural differences. And that's just sort of a comment. As another comment, I really think that the the strengths of your work, Joseph, are in some ways that you followed it over time, that you've really been thinking about this and have been able to think about the different entities that you're dealing with in terms of a corporation connected to an expanding global industry, as well as really looking deeply on the ground. So a great strength of your work is the field work that you did on the ground, as well as getting the background in that literature. And also your reading of the literature in positioning and discourse. I think a lot of that in recent years has been self-taught.
Right.
You've really gone to the more recent work in positioning, and I think you did a nice job looking at the kind of subtlety of analysis that you can get by drawing on those approaches. And so I think that's really a great strength. It's the thing that's hard about, let me just say one other strength. I think another strength is that you haven't presented to us that the discourse is the only reality. I think that you've really tried to look at how is discourse produced on the ground, resulting in certain kinds of action that are material actions. When people get moved, when people come into their houses and look at their things, that these are, physical effects that come about. And so what intrigued me so much was the relationship between discursive production and other sets of things that happen that people have to make sense of. But I think that still remains like the hardest thing to kind of figure out. Is the discourse does it push the mind to do certain things, and how and when? And so there, I think it's really important that you've talked to us about general frames, but then you've also isolated some of these turns, these smaller moments. And so at least at kind of a micro level, we can see what happens, if you do some kind of crazy survey on the ground, the standard of living survey, and what kind of thing can happen as a result, and how does the language get going? And those kinds of spaces are important, I think, for practitioners to really examine and see okay, we know there's a problem with the big frame, but here's where it can really get out of control. So let's think it through. So I think drawing our attention to those turns, those moments where the material, the discursive, have the potential to come together in ways that really escalate are important. And yet I do think that underlying it all, there is this big question of the power asymmetry and how and when that can kind of ever be balanced or bridged. And I just thought about it in terms of trust. You mentioned several times where trust is so important to have in order to be able to have meaningful, reliable communication. And I wonder, did trust erode, or was trust really never, ever going to be there because of the nature of the power imbalance? And even though we might feel very badly about that second option, maybe trust is too high a bar to ever expect, and that somehow communication needs to be developed with the assumption that trust is not going to be there. I don't particularly want to argue for that, but I did find it intriguing, and I wonder if you might reflect a little bit on trust and what role that could play. And just finally, I really like the point about the corporate social responsibility, and it leads me to just the question of, why isn't Newmont better at this? They've been operating all over the world, and they're a big savvy company. are they in the race to the bottom and they don't care, or,
Well,
or is it just
they are-
really incommensurable?
They believe they are in the race to the top. That's
Yeah.
also their competing argument with the race to the bottom. Jesus.
Yeah. Because when we look at, if we just take one issue, and then I'll stop in a second, sorry to put so much on the table. You know, you really emphasize loss, mourning, you know, and mourning that becomes complex, because once it's I mean, there are ways of getting over mourning, but when it's a complex mourning, when you're still hungry, you know, that really makes mourning so much more complicated. And compassion, you know, compensation seems to be in this, but not compassion. There's just not compassion. And I wonder, can corporations give, you know, compassion? Is there any role, maybe in that enduring engagement, there's that chance? So,
There is one interesting thing that I found. Compassion and the fear. What I realized was, I think as one official said, with regard to, for instance, the cracks, there is a fear that if we give in, then we're going to have a gateway, you know, you bring the genie out of the box, everybody's coming with all kinds of complaints. So once again, it goes down back to the bottom line, right? The fear that if we say we are responsible, as one official said, okay, we have seen these houses, obviously we realize that our vibration might have something to do with it. And then you're going to have other cracks that occurred probably some 30 years ago. So there's always that fear of responsibility, right?
and lack of trust.
The trust is interesting. The trust. I mean, what I have found from their conversations, maybe it is how do I just, this is what that I'm missing. Maybe they were naive to trust, but if you listen to their discourses, in the beginning, they actually, based on what they were doing. I mean, and once again, it comes down to this time economic power dynamics. I mean, these are poor people generally. So if you give them something very little, it means a whole lot to them. So based on all these signs, there was the feeling that, you know, something good was in the offing, except that at a point they are also telling you that they are hearing things from the other side that speaks to the opposite. But from what I heard, they seem to have really trusted. Maybe that was a temporary trust, but underlying it all, as you said, is that actually lack of true trust. In other words, as they said, they will use language like they dumped it. They took away our land and then dumped it here. After they got their gold, they forgot about us, they abandoned us, that kind of stuff. So there is that accusation that the man was exploitative, manipulative, was only trying to get whatever they wanted, and once they had what they want, they could care less. I mean, through their actions, such as the conservative view to things like food and co and all those kind of other things. You made a very interesting thing about, I think, the pristine thing that you and Frank looked at. The work by Ozin and Ozin is actually interesting because they produce discourses of their pristine nature. And when I went through, they specifically use this. Once again, they use it as strategic resource, the discourses, but they refer to a nationalist and then pristine environmental frame of articulating their problem. If you come to, I think this guy also did some extensive work in his doctoral degree, Michael Doherty in Guatemala, where they also resorted to the language of pristineness, if you will, in Guatemala, where I think the mine, I think it's Newmont, was attempting to expand to the Thorokilish, I said, and he had. They basically mobilize and change their discourses into one of a pristine nature, something that cannot be destroyed. You know, so those discourses have also been used in India, Odisha, for instance. I've forgotten the work, the author of the work. They also did some work on the conflict between extraction and the right to worship. And I think in that, I've forgotten this author's name, she did refer to this whole idea, dichotomy of segregating land as one that is pristine and one that is secondary and all those kind of stuff. So those discourses have actually been used by certain communities to articulate their loss. The sense of loss, it's amazing. I mean, particularly in the Ayasu village, where that loss that evolves around the issue of subsistence, the issue of their culture. I mean, these people are. I had an ordinary conversation with a couple of ladies who in the also resettlement, not recorded, and it was very fascinating. They seemed so upset. It's almost like all of us. They were coming with a lot of promise. Somebody said, given the job that I'm going to have, the money during the construction stage, they hired pretty much all the young guys, gave them good money, and they thought it was going to be like that for some time. So he said, hey, based on all that they were telling me, I could just not wait to come to the relocation, to come here. And then once they got here, things have changed, and there is that orchestrates that feeling that really perhaps we shouldn't have ever trusted them, because they intended to do something other than what, and that they were only doing this to reach their end objective of getting the land to do extraction. I don't know if did I answer the question enough?
I think it's okay. Yeah. Any questions
Yes,
from the
James.
audience?
Thank you very much for bringing your research back to us. I think sadly this just reminds us, that when multinational corporations and imperial powers arrive, conceptually the approach doesn't change. You mentioned, so I'm not sure if both of these villages came from the same kingdom and the same kind of tribal structure. You mentioned, we've got the discursive from both the tribe, I guess the participants, the members, and the multinational corporations. Did you look at the interaction and responsibility, culpability, complicity of the folks set to be the protectors of their people in kind of adjudicating entrance? Because there's all kinds of rules coming in that are bypassed, and the only way they get bypassed is through the system. It seems like there's a sense of responsibility, or a locus of responsibility on the discursive nature of the dialogue that centers around that aspect. What did you see, and did you see any differences between the community that was displaced versus the community that was the same? I was just interested in that dynamic.
Absolutely, Vince.
To the demographic, I think I did some extensive paper on that, and I was getting too much stuff, so I weaned it out of my work at a point. The Achim area, pretty much like most areas in Ghana, particularly the south, you have all kinds of people coming, to settle there. So historically, if you look at the demographic of my area where I studied, predominantly they are Achims, and I am an Achim, right? But then we have the Krobos, the Gans, the Airways, the Konkombes and Nanumbes and all kinds of people. Those who can be termed as settlers, right? They've settled there for years and years and years, so they are part of, but predominantly they are Chims. Now, in terms of those helping in terms of culpability and this kind of stuff, there was this contentious role of chiefs as well. Now, chiefs play a very interesting role. the Constitution, all lands, the chiefs are custodians of lands in Ghana. It doesn't matter whether it's in the north or in the south. But they are custodians of the surface of the land. Everything beneath the land belongs to the state, and it's vested in the president of Ghana. That's what the 1992 Constitution says. Now, the president kind of vests that responsibility of securing peace around mining areas to the chiefs. So the chiefs, they are not legally mandated or statutory, but they have the role to ensure peace for the people, for the mines to work peacefully, whilst also ensuring that their subjects also are not shortchanged by these mining companies. The verdict is still out on that question, because oftentimes from my studies, and obviously from several studies in the literature, the chief's role is much more of a complicated, nuanced one, sometimes controversial. A lot of the members in the communities actually accuse the chiefs of colluding. They call it. So at the point I created a whole chapter about it. The chiefs are in cahoots with the mine. What they say is, when the chiefs go out there, we tell them our problems. So generally, if you look at the structure of these societies, they just don't go out there to the mine to make complaints. Everything normally will go through their leaders, the elders and the chiefs. And so the chiefs will take the matter up, and with exception of the public forums that they normally hold, which for a lot of communities now claim it's actually meaningless, because the company only comes there to dictate whatever they want to do, not to actually seek full participation. Now, when the chiefs go there, they accuse them of coming back with nothing, and that they have their mouth stuffed, right? Or their pockets stuffed. That is the perception that these chiefs are actually in there for their own parochial interest and not necessarily their interest. It's very contentious. To some extent, too, they have actually also praised the chiefs of actually standing on their behalf. But in the main, they seem to be skeptical about the chief's role.
Anything else from the side of the committee? Do we have anything else we would like to ask?
As I said,
Anyone?
I could talk
Anyone-
for another
anyone
few days.
So I think we are running a tiny bit
Or
long.
maybe I can ask myself my own questions.
You actually could take a break from questions for a moment. So, but we're going to the committee will slip out for a minute. But before we do that, can we again just show our appreciation to Joseph for the really wonderful work that he's done on this dissertation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Okay. We will say congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
And we are going to hurry to take. We have a couple things we want to say to you, but we're going to hurry and take a photo.
Absolutely.
Because
Thank you, Frank.
Because Frank needs to drop off, so we wanted to have this celebratory moment. Just move this. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
It's funny, I have a feeling I'm on this photo.
Yes, you are, Frank.
You're on the photo.
You are on the photo. Great. So we have congratulated Joseph.
Thank you, Thank you so much, Agnieszka. Thank you so much. I could never have done this without you.
So we want to say that we had a couple suggestions that came out of the discussion, but we feel that basically you have earned the degree, and we're very happy with the work that you did. But I'll just maybe mention what we imagined. We really heard, like the real clarity in what your work offers to the literature. So we found a couple places, like at the end of your intro and maybe in your conclusion, to really highlight, you know, to say, give it another kind of definitive paragraph.
Okay.
No rewriting, no reorganizing,
Good
but just, you know, put that flag
I
down.
like the no rewriting part. Thank you.
And then one more thing, and that's that we're still left, you know, I think, oh God, I keep doing that. No, I got it. We're still left with that really difficult problem of the kind of structural constraints.
Okay.
So I think, you know, in a short way, I think you can own that problem, that
Okay.
that is still out there.
Okay.
At the same time, what you've shown us is that there may be some ways to intervene in the discourse to address even power relations at the micro level. So again, in your conclusion, you get a little space to make some recommendations. Go back to the first question that Frank asked about what is a practitioner can you do? Maybe there are gender disparities or chief citizen disparities or young people, old people disparities that even those a practitioner could address to, you know, make this process somewhat less conflictual or not as anti-democratic as it sometimes sounds and feels. So those are, you know, choices for you, and you know, I think you can spend the time, you know, a short amount of time in some ways, because that's what's left, and you'll, you know, address those in whatever way you would like. But those are our suggestions.
Thank you.
But otherwise,
Thank you. Thank you so much.
congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I really wish I could be there. It really was a remarkable job that you did, and a real contribution to the literature. Your presentation went really well, so big hug to you, and good luck with your future.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Take care, Frank.